In this video, I'm going to share some AI editing tips using examples from this recent shoot. These tips will help save time while getting high quality results as well. So let's start with something very simple and work our way up from there. So let's start off with this shot of the kitchen, and there were some AI improvements that were done to this. This is the finished shot. If we take a look at how it all started, this was just an ambient shot, and you can see it needed a lot of love. It would be very difficult to do this in HDR because of the intense amount of light disparity everywhere and all the color casts. Even if you shut off the interior lights, you'd have problems. Of course, that wasn't a problem when we get to the finished product. What I did was I took some flash shots. And you can see here by cutting out that ambient light, I can do a flash composite, editing myself out, and also doing a light and blending mode pop with then some selective flambient added into it with just some of the ambient luminance brushed into certain places. Then I also had some window pulls that were added here using flash, and then AI helped me do some of this proper color correction. Now, if I've lost you so far, if you're not familiar with doing this flash and flambient technique, then I would just like to quickly mention that you can learn more about this in my course on professional interior photography. It's one of many courses that I offer online to do professional real estate photography, including expert editing, the exteriors, videography, business and marketing. And of course, I do have a series of books on real estate photography as well, and I have links to all of that down in the description. But what I'd like to do here is by color correcting a lot of this, we have to be careful of these various pendant lights up here because they're brass, and we don't want to lose the color from that. And AI can help us with that. The one tool that's often overlooked with AI is the object selection tool, which we're going to use in a few different ways. It's over here if you're not familiar with that, by holding down when you click on this little icon. Instead of just grabbing quick selection tool, you'd want the object selection tool with some various settings that I'm going to go through. Now the thing is, with the object selection tool, it doesn't use generative AI, which everybody equates to when we do generative fill or the remove tool. Instead, this uses something known as discriminative AI. And what that does, it analyzes and then classifies boundaries, in this case in an image. So being AI, it is constantly learning and thus improving over time. So every release of Photoshop, this does get better. So let's take a look now at what I would do using the object selection tool to do our color corrections here, because the worst color corrections are almost always on these white ceilings. So what I can do, I'll zoom out just a little bit, and by having the object selection tool selected, and up here I'm going to make sure that this add is selected here. That's the dual icon here, so that if I need to, I can keep adding to the selection. I want to make sure that over here under the cog wheel that I do not have Object Finder on. This takes way too much resource, will really slow you down. So instead, make sure that is turned off. Next, it's best to use lasso, not rectangle, but the lasso selection, and also make sure sample all layers is checked. It's often best to use hard edge, which will get you right up against the edge of what we're going to detect. And then once you have that done, all you need to do is real sloppily grab the ceiling. So I'm just going to draw, you can see a real sloppy polygon around the ceiling. I'm not getting very exact on this at all. And when I close that and I release, then you can see it selected the ceiling. Now it's selected a little bit more than what I'd like there, and if I want, I can then deselect that. But what I'm going to do first is just use this, and then we'll deselect afterwards. So the next thing I would do is I'd hit one of my actions that creates a hue saturation layer, and you can see that's what it did down here. All this was that selection with then a hue saturation layer with the saturation turned down just a little bit. But as you can see, it desaturated those brass lines, those brass poles that are coming down here for the pendant lights. So let's zoom in here a little bit. And what would I do to take care of that? Let's use the object selection tool again with the same settings. And while we're on the mask, for that hue saturation layer, we'll just draw something kind of around where that is. And you can see then that grabs that really well. And I'll just do that for these others just real quick. And once I have those, then I can just press the delete key and there we go, deselect, and that's now brought back in. So now it did that with using AI, knowing with this discriminative AI that the selection tool uses, what the boundaries were, so I have a very clean edit. Now you recall that this also grabbed a piece of that wall, which we technically shouldn't have in there. So if I wanted to, I could also go over here and it should be able to detect that area, which it did, and I can just press the delete key there. Now the rest of it is just standard type of adjustments like I show within my expert editing course, and that's what this layer did here, but it also had, if we take a look, some subtraction done from the selection, from the entire image, and that was also done by using then that same object selection tool, and it knows where the boundaries are. So things are looking good here. We've got a perfectly desaturated ceiling. We have a well color corrected interior with that, but there's other things here that we can do with AI. For instance, there are a few things here that really should be removed. So if I go up here to my top layer and I zoom in, I can see that there's a couple things here that probably should be removed. I'm not too worried about this little stopper for the garbage disposal here, but this is really annoying here, seeing this strong reflection here. And I can remove that, but the best way to do that will really save time and also save space and make it easier on yourself later to edit is to use the remove tool on a new layer. This is how you do it. What you do is you simply go up to layer, new layer, and it's just going to be a blank layer, so you could name it whatever you'd like and just press OK. Next, we'll use the remove tool, and that will be over here. And if, once again, if you don't see it right away, then you just hold click on this little icon, and then you want to make sure that you choose the remove tool. Now, what I'm going to do here with the remove tool is make sure that generative AI is off. This, once again, is a hog with your CPU resources. Make sure that sample all layers is checked and that remove after each stroke is unchecked. Now what we can do is, with a brush size of about so, we can then draw an outline where that reflection is, and when you close that, if it detects that area well, it closes it like this. This tells you immediately that it's made a good selection. Now at this point, you can either hit return on your keyboard or press the check mark up here, and then it'll do generative remove, and now you have it on a separate layer. Now, you may not like the generative remove that it did. You can see what it did in this case. So you can continue using that generative remove tool on these other various items, and you can remove them as you see fit. Either way you do it, you can see that now we have something that is on a separate layer. In fact, if we just look at that layer only, that's all that it was. So this is one way that you can more easily control it. It's saving a lot of space because it's a very small layer. But we really took a chance going right up against the edge of this island. So a better way to do this in cases like this is known as a boundary edit for the remove tool. What we can do is we'll use this reflection up here, which is just annoying as all get out. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a boundary edit. We'll just go to layer, new layer, name it whatever you'd like. Now on this layer, what we're going to do is draw a boundary. Let's go in at 100%, take the polygon lasso tool. So that's over here. We'll just grab the polygon lasso tool and say that we want to make sure that we stay within, let's say, this boundary here, and we don't want to go beyond that. So now we have just this top of the fridge selected. Now when I use the remove tool here, I don't have to worry about going up here. I can just take this remove tool and look, going outside of it, it won't, because I've set a boundary saying that you need to stay within this area. Now that I've got that selected within that boundary, I can then press the check mark up here, or I can press return on my keyboard, and when it does its generative remove, you can see it did it very cleanly. I'll do Control D or Command D on a Mac to deselect. You can see how clean it brought that to the edges. And so now with this then, my final image, when it was all said and done, looked like this with the final adjustments applied to it. But let's take a look at the next tip. Let's use this indoor spa. This was very tricky to shoot. This was very, very bright. And it also didn't have all the water that was inside of the spa. This whole place was still under construction, believe it or not. It was a flip, a very expensive one out here. But what we want to do is, let's say that we wanted to put some water, some foamy water in here using generative fill. So to do that, I would use typically, once again, the object selection tool. I'll go in here a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. And let's say that I grab, just for instance, this area here, just kind of above the water line. I go outside of here and let's see what it detects. When it does, you can see it detected that fairly well. But if I used generative fill here, the problem I have is this may be too large of a selection. Generative fill, all the generative AI tools in Photoshop as of right now, they're only 2,000 pixels wide or 2,000 pixels high. If you exceed that, you get low quality results. So if we take a look at the info over here, this little info window, we can see what the size is. If you don't see the info window panel here, you can go up to Window and then select Info. That then shows this info panel here. And there's a lot you can do with it. I've shown other things in other videos on this as well. Throughout my editing course, I talk about how to control colors and change colors exactly by using this. In this case though, just very simply, we can see the width and height, and the width is 2,500 pixels of what we selected. And we still need to expand that selection a little bit too to really make this work. So what do? Well, the best thing here is probably first to resize the image. So let me just deselect that. I did Control D, or it'd be Command D on a Mac. Let's take a look at the image size. If you go up to Image and then to Image Size, we can see this is a very large image. So it's 24 megapixels. It's 6,000 by 4,000 high. And we don't really need it that big for the MLS, for the multiple listing service. So let's say that in this case, if we reduce this by a couple thousand pixels, then it'd be easier within the bounds of that 2,000 pixel limit set by Photoshop's generative AI. So what I'll do is I'll resize this to let's say 4,000 pixels. That'll still give us plenty to work with. That reduced it by 2,000. And by the way, this doesn't have to be on just a single layer. When you do image size, it'll affect all layers. In this case, I just brought up one layer just to show the finished image and what we could do with it. So once you have that, you would just click OK, and now you're going to get a resized image. So let's go in here once again to 100%. Let's go in here and use our quick selection tool to grab that selection again. And this time, we're obviously going to see a different size and how much flexibility we have for resizing or adding. We can see here that the selection is only 1,600 pixels wide, so that's good. Now we can expand that selection. So what we can do is go up to Select, and then to Modify, and then to Expand. And let's expand that selection by, let's say, 20 pixels. So now we're above the waterline, and that's good. So now I can do a generative fill, and it should look a lot better. So in this case, I want to add some foamy water with bubbles. So with that selected, I will go up to Edit, Generative Fill, and in the prompt, I will type in, let's type in foamy water with, I gotta spell it right, water with bubbles. Once I've got that and I hit generate, it goes out obviously to the cloud. It's going to give me 3 different options, and here's one of them here. And if we go in then 100%, we can see that it's a fairly decent quality. We can turn that layer off and on, and we can see that now it's not going to be all pixelated like it would if it was resized by knowing the boundary. Now, this doesn't always work that great, but it's really hard to virtually stage something like this. This would be the ideal case for using, for instance, generative fill to actually create something. We could try other variations of this, by the way, by saying foamy blue water so it doesn't have necessarily that black background that they have. We can click generate on that. So now we've got a few different options. They're not necessarily the best, but of course you could continue playing with that. But the key here is that by knowing what our bounds were, by having this selected over here in width and height, and we can see that once again, if you go to the mask and you press Control click on it, selecting what we have, you can see this is what we have for the width and the height. By keeping it within the bounds of that 2000 pixel limit, then we have something that's going to be higher quality. For this next tip, we're going to apply some of the things I've shown so far, but this technique can really be used for a lot of different things using AI, including not just generative fill, but also the remove tool and a lot of other things you might consider doing for editing. I'll do it very simply here by working on some of these reflections. You can see here that without this group, this is what we had for these reflections. Now it's a very simple type repair, but once again, this is to show a lot of control that you can have over AI for a lot of other edits that you may want to do. Notice also is that, as I mentioned, this is in a group, and that's because we're going to have a lot more control over what we do with the AI. So let's zoom in here just a little bit, and let's say that we did want to reduce these reflections. So I'm going to, in this case, use generative fill. So I'm first going to grab the polygon lasso tool. So I'm going to go up here and just grab the polygon lasso tool. And then where these reflections are the worst, I'm just going to kind of go around these a little bit. I can also go a little bit usually to the outside, and that's good. And remember too that we're trying to stay within that 2000 pixels bound. So what we have here within that boundary, after I select, let's say this area right there, then I can go over to our info window and see we're just above it. This will probably still work, but at this point, I'd either want to resize my image or maybe make a smaller selection. In this case, let's say that that's okay. Now I'm going to go above the layer or layers that I need to edit and have generative fill, or if it was going to be the remove tool, do this. And in this case, I'm just going to go to edit and then generative fill, type nothing, and let it figure out what it should do to fill and repair those reflections. And you can see it did a really good job with these three different options. And I can select to use any of these that I wish. This one here, the second one, probably looks a little bit better. It really did reduce quite a bit, although the third one really took those reflections out. And you can see this is with generative fill, this is without it. Now, one of the things though that it did is if I go in here closer, you can see that it removed some of the veining out of this quartz countertop. So if I turn off our generative fill, you can see we lost this detail here. So I'd like to have more control over what we do here. And this is where the root of this trick comes in. And once again, you can apply this for a lot of different things. In fact, here next, I'll show you also how we're going to apply it for a simple repair here. The thing is, we want to control the extent of how much of this is going to be applied. So what you do is after doing the generative fill, I'll zoom out just a little bit here, we want to put this into a group. So you right click on this layer and you can say new group from layers and name it whatever you'd like. Next, we want to add a layer mask where we're going to then hide everything. So go up to layer and then layer mask and then hide all. Now I can take a brush, select it over here. I'll use about a 30% flow, take that size down a little bit, and I'll decide where I'd like to have that generative fill applied. So I know I want to do it here, and sure enough, I can get rid of those reflections very nicely by painting on that. And you can see this is then before and this is after. Also a little bit of overlap that was out here. Notice it got just a little bit outside of where that counter was. So I can just take the polygon tool here and say, you know what, make sure that we don't include that. I'll just delete that from the mask. Okay, zooming back out here then, we want to get rid of some of these other reflections, but we want to be able to keep then that veining that's in the countertop. So I'll take the brush, and at 30% flow, I can then decide where I'm going to brush that in. So I'm going to go on either side of the veining to try to preserve it. And the same thing over here. I'll just reduce that where I need to here. So now this is with what I've added. This was what it looked like before. So I'm able to reduce the amount of reflection or the edit that I want to apply without having the entire thing done here by generative fill, which was what this would look like. So instead, I have more control over to what extent and where I want that AI being applied. Now let's look at this other example, and this is very common. This is something I do a lot for hardwood floors, and this is a very simple example. This was just an empty room, but the sun was beating in really hard here, and I would just deliver this photo to the realtor. If they asked me to do something about a harsh reflection, especially if it was larger, then of course I would charge as an add-on, and it's a very simple thing to do. Now I could do generative fill here, but a lot of times for an area only this size, you could use the remove tool. So try that first, since that doesn't cost you any generative credits. What we'll do, we'll just zoom in here a little bit on that floor so we can see what's going on, and we'll make a new blank layer. We'll go up to layer and then new layer and name it whatever you'd like. Then I'll take the remove tool over here. So I've got then the remove tool, and I'm going to draw an outline around that heavy sun hitting the floor. And when I close that, it grabbed all of it. That tells me I got a good selection. So now I can do the remove tool, and I'll just click the checkbox. You can also then press enter on your keyboard, and you can see it removed it. But that's with everything now gone, and I might want to bring some of that back. Now I could group it and do just like we did before and brush some of that in. But instead what I can do is I can merely change the layer opacity here. So if I drop the opacity down to about, let's say 52%, I've got that much coming through, and here's 33%. So this shows me the grain of the wood. So I can go in here and I can see that, oh yeah, well, we've got some of the grain of the wood showing through here. That's better than if we didn't have it, which was here where it was completely blown out. So that may be more acceptable. But even if we did it in a group, we could still change that group's opacity in a similar fashion. But either way, all of these tips are just scratching the surface on what you can do with AI editing for real estate photos. And if you'd like to see more, just leave me a comment below. And once again, you can also take a look at my online courses, and links to those are down in the description of this video as well.